So, today what I want to tell you about is something called apophatic theology. And if that sounds like a mouthful, that's because it most certainly is. What it can be summarized as is apophatic is basically when you describe something using a negative description. So if I say, that's unbelievable, the word I'm using has a negative prefix for a positive claim, right? If I say, man, this tastes unbelievably good, right? That's an apophatic description of that thing. If on the internet you'll see comments where a person is like, well, you're not wrong. They're saying that you're right. They're affirming your decision. They're like, whatever it is that they're doing, they're saying the opposite of like the words kind of mean, and they're using a negatively tuned description of what they're meaning to say. And we do this specifically so that we can give a gist or kind of a rounded off kind of sentiment of what we're saying without giving a fully clarified picture, purposefully for the purpose that you get the idea, but you don't really get a full understanding. And we do this with God, apophatic theology, in that we routinely will, even throughout Scripture, you'll see statements like, God's ways are inscrutable. Who has known the mind of the Lord, nor who has given to him or that ought to be paid back? Like things like that, that God is not a man that he should lie. God is all these kinds of that God is unfathomable, that God is indeterminable. Things like this that's saying like we know what God's not. With the statement like God's not a man, like we have a general handle on what human beings are like. And so if you know what man is like, listen, God is not like that. So you can also do this in other ways of like that my wife is not tall, or the Grand Canyon is not small. Half Dome is kind of a big rock, right? Where there's a poetic element to it. And where we encounter this often in the realm of apologetics is a person will say, well, God has mysterious ways. We don't have a fully comprehensive grasp of everything that God is. Theology is primarily apprehensive, not comprehensive. So that like we know through Scripture, through natural theology, through man who is the image of God, that we can we've been revealed certain things about God, but that's not all complete, totally what God is. Like that's not like you can't put all of God into a specific box or a single jar. There's too much of it. It's like trying to put all of the ocean into a red Solo cup. That's just not going to happen. But having a red Solo cup of ocean water, you still can gain a understanding, a scaled down model of what the ocean contains. So, as a comparative analogy, I have been married to my wife for almost 7.5 years. We've been together for about 8, like we've been dating, like all that, like for about 8.5 years, maybe a little longer than that. And in all of that time, I've never reached a point where there's nothing more to learn about her. I've never, we've spent, we don't have kids yet when I'm away, and we also happen to work at the same place, and we have an hour-long commute, so we go, we work the same shift and everything, so we spend a lot more uninterrupted time in close proximity, unfocused time together than a lot of couples have or do at the stage where we're at. So we spend a lot more time talking, conversing, and everything, and despite the amount of shared words we've had, there's never been a point where there's nothing more to discuss with this person. There's nothing more to learn. She always has more insight and more wisdom, and like she's never met a stranger. She is constantly interacting with people. Everybody adores her. But listen, nobody knows her with the depth or precision that I know her. And the only thing that is affirmed within me without a shadow of doubt is that as much as I know her, I do not know all of her. I don't know everything about her yet. I would say that I know her. I have a consistent picture of her. I can predict some of the things she would or does do. I can comprehend in a very, like, when she does this, that, or some other thing, that I can understand the process that led her to do that. But that doesn't mean I know like, she surprises me on a routine basis, and she delights me, and all of that. Translating this back to God, often what happens is we'll be talking about suffering, and suffering is a hard subject to discuss in an apologetic way because it's so close to a lot of people's identity, their soul. It's so close to their being, and they want personal explanations often of why this event happened or this transpired, whatever, right? And simply, like, I don't know, is a valid answer to a lot of those questions. And so what they'll say is that Christians are defaulting back to this unfathomability, this apophatic theology as a means of exercising a God of the gaps. That's hard to understand. That's hard to explain. That's hard to come to a conclusion about. So I'm just going to say God is tough, God is hard, and I'm just going to abandon or neglect that means of study from now on. I'm not going to study that any more deeply than I have, and God is mysterious. But that's not what apophatic theology is. It's a conclusion. It's, as much as I have studied the things and the nature and the character and the actions and the behaviors of God, I have found that there's just more out there. There's just more to be learned about, discussed, and discovered. There's just more. Like, that he is an unplumbable depth. He's an unfathomable reach. He is there's no one has ever seen the bottom of the ocean at its deepest depths. No one's been down there. We know that there is eventually there's a seafloor at that most deep place. We know it's down there, but nobody's been there. We know there's a furthest reach edge of the universe space. We know it's out there, but no one has ever seen it. But you know it's there. I'm not making some kind of blind assertion that there's a backstop on the edge of the universe, but it's there, right? And the same thing with God, of that as much as we've seen of God, there's still more. And I might have a really solid, robust, educated grasp of this particular aspect of theology, but there's more. And a lot of the denominational bickering that you see, whether that's Arminian, Molinist, and Calvinist, or if it's on the matter of like speaking in tongues, continuationist versus cessationism, a lot of this is that someone will really have a good, strict, robust, red cup, solo cup grasp of this particular aspect of theology, and they'll say that this is it, this is all there is, when there's so much more of ocean out there that they don't contain. And that is, it's incredibly comforting and satisfying to recognize that there's still more, that in our relationship, like, imagine if at 5 years of marriage, my wife and I, we would just come to this sudden recognition of like, I guess I know everything there is to know about this person. That's it. And where would our relationship be now if that's the conclusion I had made? It definitely wouldn't have the strength and the robustness and the reliability and the delightfulness that it has. It definitely wouldn't have those things in it, for sure. What it would have instead would be maybe a little bit of a disillusionment, exhaustion, frustration. Maybe if I had this imagination in my mind that I knew everything there is to know about her, she will never surprise me again, she'll never catch me unexpecting or catch me off guard, she'll never do any of those things. I know everything about her. Like, there a little bit of spirit, a little bit of life would kind of vanish out of it, and I could easily probably predict that if I felt that way, we would be very near to the precipice of divorce. I'm confident in that, because discovery and curiosity are so important to the human experience, and in relationships especially. So I think that kind of ties in as well to why certain people lose their affection for God. Like, they decide that they're not interested in theology, that they walk away from ministry of the faith at some point, because they've allowed themselves to be convinced that there's just nothing more of God to learn about, to discover, to think about. That they've decided, they've just closed themselves off. And, like, literally, I mean, when you go to a truly beautiful place, let's say the Grand Canyon, you see it, and you're just like, there's so much more to be contained than you can even think about. Like, your eye can't even perceive how amazing it is, right? And so, if you shut your eyes, you close yourself off to all that grandeur, right? But a lot of people seem to take a perspective with God of that they have a postcard of the Grand Canyon, and they think that's all there is. And so they take that and they reject that postcard, thinking that they've rejected God, when they haven't. They've rejected their encapsulation. And if they would just go to the place, the Grand Canyon, and see how much grandeur there really is there, how grandiose that real place is, they'd be like, wow, that little thing lied to me. Same thing true here. And if they would just pursue God, rather than being focused on trying to put God into the solo cup, just pursue Christ and pursue His inscrutability, His unsearchability. You search into, like, you look into those things, you will be satisfied by them.